Good morning. Welcome to the Mind of STEM channel, where you get your daily dose of science, technology, engineering, and math. My name is Leon Jones, and in this segment, I'm going to talk about a behavioral science. So, the title of today's video is, would you like to study psychology? Would you like to study psychology? Now, when one looks at psychology, one would view it as a social science. Yes, it has its area in social science, but it also has emphasis in an actual science because you do a lot of analyzing behavior. Now, when it comes to psychology, psychology is the scientific study of the mind and behavior according to the ASA. Now, the ASA is the American Psychological Association. Now, psychology is a multifaceted discipline and includes many subfields of study, such as human development, sports, health, clinical, social behavior, and cognitive processes. Now, psychology is a relatively new science, with most advances happening just over the past 150 years. However, its origins can be traced back to ancient Greece between 400 and 500 years BC. The emphasis was a philosophical one, with great thinkers such as Socrates. He lived from 470 BC to 399 BC, influencing Plato, 428, 427 BC to 348, 347 BC, who in turn influenced Aristotle, who lived from 384 BC to 322 BC. Now, philosophers used to discuss many topics now studied by modern philosophy, such as memory, free will versus determinism, nature versus nurture, attraction. Now, the beginnings of psychology as a discipline, this is how it happened. Now, in the early days of psychology, there were two dominant theoretical perspectives regarding how the brain worked. The brain works with structuralism and functionalism. Now, structuralism was given a name pioneered by William Wundt, who focused on breaking down mental process into the most basic components. Now, the term originated from Edward Teichner, an American psychologist who was trained by Wundt. Now, Wundt was important because he separated psychology from philosophy by analyzing the workings of the mind in a more structured way, with more emphasis on being objective, measurement, and control. Now, structuralism relied more on trained introspection, the research method whereby subjects related what was going on in their minds while performing a certain task. However, introspection proved to be unreliable as a method because there was too much individual variation in the experiences and reports of research subjects. Now, despite the failure of introspection, Wundt was an important figure in the history of psychology as he opened the first laboratory dedicated to psychology back in 1873, and its opening is usually thought of as the beginning of modern experimental psychology. Now, an American psychologist named William James developed an approach where he came from, what's been known, not where he came from, what is known as functionalism, that disagreed with the focus of structuralism. Now, James argued that the mind is constantly changing and it's pointless to look for the structure of conscious experience. Rather, he proposed to focus on how and why an organism does something, i.e., the functions or purpose of the brain. Now, James suggested that psychologists should look for underlying cause of behavior and the mental process involved. Now, this emphasis on the causes and consequences of behavior has influenced contemporary psychology. Now, the perspectives of psychology. Again, I'm going to talk about the perspectives of psychology. Now, as we know, we talked about the brain that features structuralism and functionalism. Now, I'm going to tell you this. Structuralism and functionalism have since been replaced by several dormant and influential approaches to psychology, each one underpinned by a shared set of assumptions of what people are like, what is important to study, and how to study it. Psychoanalysis, founded by, everybody's heard of this name, Sigmund Freud, was the dominant paradigm in psychology. During the early 20th century, Freud believed that people could be cured by making conscious their unconscious thoughts and motivations, thus gaining insight. Now, Freud's psychoanalysis was the original psychodynamic theory, but the psychodynamic approach as a whole includes all theories that were based on his ideas: Jung, Adler, and Erickson. Now, the classic contemporary perspectives in psychology to adopt scientific strategies were the behaviorists, who were renowned for their reliance on controlled laboratory experiments and rejection of an unseen unconscious forces as causes of behavior. Now, later the humanistic approach became the third force in psychology and proposed the importance of subjective experience and growth. Now, during the 1960s and 1970s, psychology began a cognitive revolution, adopting a rigorous scientific, lab-based scientific approach while application to memory, perception, cognitive development, mental illness, and more. Now, remember, as in every career or every subject, there are goals. Now, the goals of psychology, there are four main goals of psychology, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to describe them, because within the goals, there's prediction and change when it comes to the behavioral process and others. Now, first goal is to describe. Describing the behavior of cognition is the first goal of psychology. Now, this can enable researchers to develop further general laws of human behavior. For example, through describing the process, or let's make a correction here, I'm going to talk about an example of describing a response of dogs to various stimuli. Ivan Pavlov, as you know as Pavlov's theory, developed laws in learning known as classical conditioning theory. You always hear about Pavlov and the dog. Now, to explain, once researchers have described general laws of behavior, the next step is to explain how and why this trend occurs. Psychologists will propose theories which can explain a behavior. To predict. Now, psychology aims to be able to predict further and future behavior from the findings of empirical research. If a prediction is not confirmed, then the explanation it is based on might need to be revised. For example, classical conditioning predicts that if a person associates a negative outcome with a stimuli, they may develop a phobia or aversion of the stimuli. And the last, the change. Once psychology has described, explained, and made predictions about behavior, changing it or controlling a behavior can be attempted. For example, interventions based on classic conditioning, such as systematic desensitization, have been used to treat people with anxiety disorders, including phobias. Now, once everything has been put together, it's going to be evaluated. Now, the critical evaluation comes as Kuhn argues that a field of study can only be legitimately regarded as a science if most of its followers subscribe to a common perspective or paradigm. Kuhn believes that psychology is still a paradigmatic science, and I'm talking about a paradigmatic science when it comes to psychology. And the reason why I'm saying that is psychology is a relatively new discipline. while others believe it's already scientific because of its laboratory and its analyzation. Now, Watson's behaviorism in turn was replaced by information processing, which is an approach. Now, the critical point here is, can psychology be considered a science if psychologists disagree about what to study and how to study it? Now, here's what I'm going to say. It depends on who's doing the research. Because when it comes to the perspectives, it's behaviorism, psychodynamic approach, humanistic approach, cognitive psychology, biological approach. The key studies: Milgram shock study, Ashline study, Zimbardo prison study, strange situation, Pavlov's dogs. Now the debates, you have nature versus nurture, free will versus determinism, reduction versus holism, nomothetic versus ideographic. But one must understand, when it comes to psychology, psychology is a scientific study of the mind and behavior according to the APA. Now, psychology, again, is a multifaceted discipline and includes many subfields. And those fields are, of course, human development, sports, health, clinical, social behavior, cognitive process. Now, there's one, too, that I want to put in there, that individuals who major in organizational leadership might talk about, and it's industrial psychology, which that's where you find your organizational behavior courses. But at the end of the day, when it comes to psychology, it is relatively new, but it is considered a science as part of the STEM programs. And that concludes this video on psychology. If you like what I just presented, please comment, share, and subscribe. Now, if you want some hot topics, check out the 411 Talk Zone radio show, Red Pill Edition, also on YouTube. And if you want to go deeply into STEM and controversial topics, check me out on Blog Talk Radio. Now, if you cannot find me on YouTube or Blog Talk Radio, simply follow me on Twitter and Facebook, because after I record all of my videos and Blog Talk Radio shows, I post them to that platform so everybody has a chance to listen to all of my information for free. Now, I am developing a Patreon page, and that will be for some of my content that I cannot present on YouTube. But other than that, I just want to thank you again for listening to the Mind of STEM channel. And on this channel, you get a daily dose of science, technology, engineering, and math. Once again, my name is Leon Jones. Have a wonderful and blessed day.